starting point.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, everybody. This is Chris Frew. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of What's the Buzz. This time we're talking about what's the buzz post JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. I'm excited to be joined today by Roger Lias, Executive Advisor at Kymanox. Roger, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, it was last time I saw you, we were in San Francisco at a brunch, probably the day before the chaos began. So it's good to catch up on the tail end of it.
I think it was. I think I saw you pre-JPM, and then I saw you in the distance a couple of times during the crazy week. But
the chaos
nice
of everything. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get your thoughts. I know this was your 20th JP Morgan conference, so I'm excited to dive into it.
I don't know if it was 20th, Chris, but something like that. It's been a long time.
Somewhat up 20th. Yeah. So, don't quote me on that. I'm throwing ballparks. So before we jump in there, let me talk a little bit about what's the buzz for the people joining in. This is our weekly podcast interview series where we really talk to ecosystem builders, people who are out in the community, building the ecosystems that help life science companies thrive and grow. Kymanox has been an ecosystem builder. They're one of our annual sponsors. They've been supporting BioBuzz. Really, actually, goes back to like 15 years. Way back when I had hair, Roger. Put it that way. So we talk to ecosystem builders about building the industry, and again, this is an exciting conversation because it is post JP Morgan. This program is sponsored this month and all month long by Qnova Life Sciences, a global innovative regulatory consulting group specializing in advanced therapeutics and medical devices, getting them through regulatory approval, risk mitigation, and really expanding into the U.S. Markets. I really appreciate it. Actually, I was out at JP Morgan with Qnova. They have a life sciences forum, had about 1,300 companies attend this year. This was my first event, so it was exciting to go out there with Qnova. And so again, I want to thank them for setting the stage for today's event and for sponsoring it this month. So with that, Roger, tell me, one, you look well rested, more well rested than a lot of people I've been seeing post last week. So tell me, after several years of going back and forth, just high level over the fence, what are your thoughts this year? What's your kind of general takeaway as opposed to years past?
Yeah, I like JP Morgan. I enjoy it every year. I go. It's an interesting event because it's not one event. The JP Morgan event itself is centered at the Western, and you have to be important and invited to go to that. I've been a couple of times, but I didn't go this year to the actual formal JP Morgan events. A lot of people don't realize that. But there's all these other events around the side, Biotech Showcase and Biopartnering, and the event you just mentioned, to mention just a few. So it's a tremendous opportunity to get together with people. Truly global event. Obviously, it's in San Francisco, US centric, but there are people from all over the world. San Francisco gets crazy busy. Hotel rooms go insanely expensive, and so on and so forth. I think we know all of that. So it's worth being there. I think this year, my impressions, high level, I don't know if this is a true observation. It seemed a little less busy than usual. That might be a function of people's tight budgets and smaller companies not being able to afford to attend or something. I don't know, but nonetheless, very, very busy. I think it's all, a lot of the JP Morgan, we do sort of all sorts of partnering and business and selling around the sides, but it's still fundamentally a financial driven event. So on that side, I think we've got to come out of it. And a lot of people use this term, but I think it is appropriate this year, cautious optimism. Now, that said, we're not out of the woods by any means. As you and I were just talking, there tends to be a lot of hype around the event, and everybody gets excited, and all these people, and lots of great discussions. It's still tough out there. It's really tough, but I think there's a little bit of the haves and the have-nots. I think we're seeing IPO windows starting to open. We're seeing some M&A activity happening with big pharma. They have quite heavy balance sheets. They're starting to deploy capital, and of course there's probably some quite attractive assets out there as well. I didn't see at the event, I don't think, the same level of announcement that we normally get. We had an announcement, the Lilly and NVIDIA deal for the sort of $1 billion AI labs and things was great, but that was pre-JP Morgan, a lot of talk about it. I think we had, AbbVie and the Regen oncology deal was quite exciting. But in general, I didn't see the same number, and I stand to be corrected on this. From my perspective, there weren't as many big deals announced, but nonetheless, big pharma is opening its pocketbook. And again, the IPO window seems to be opening as well globally.
Would you say that like, and just listening to you, would you say the optimism was really built around kind of some of this later stage downstream opening up, like the IPO, M&A, kind of biopharma investment and the CapEx that we're seeing across the US? Was that really the driver of the optimism this year, or did you see anything on the other kind of bookend of things?
Yeah, I think they're related, right? So the markets open up, the changes in treasury, the public markets, all of these things. We deal a lot with smaller companies in development phases or development platforms. So the venture capitalists, that's the guys I was really looking at and talking to primarily. I talked to a few bankers and things, but it was really the VC guys, and it's a struggle for the early phase guys, and it's not just capital being tied up or powder being kept dry to service existing portfolios and things like that. We've got the whole NIH debacle, we've got SBIR concerns. It's hard if you're a small preclinical company, or even if you've got phase 1 data. It's not easy right now to maintain funding. So I think conserving cash and runways is key. But I think the two sides of the capital markets, if you want to call it that, in the broader sense, early and late, are very much integrated, right? So I think with the situation with treasury, with public markets, IPO windows, M&A activities, basically what that does is allows the venture guys to raise a few more funds and start distributing them again downwards. And it's not as if the money isn't there. There's a huge amount of capital out there, but from my observation, the way it's being distributed is has been in a much more risk-averse fashion. So if you're a therapeutic company, of course, there's more than therapeutics out there. With a lot of interesting discussions on devices, combination products, all sorts of interesting technologies as well this past week. But certainly, if you're a therapeutic company, late phase data is king right now. So those that have good late phase data, to my way of thinking, are not having any trouble accessing capital. It's the platform companies, the earlier guys, certainly the preclinical guys, really tough right now. And I think another interesting observation from some of the discussions I've been having is, people are getting creative. They can't go through their traditional routes, or it's much tougher to. Sovereign wealth funds out of the Middle East, or even crowdfunding. I mean, all sorts of interesting approaches depending on what you're looking for. And again, I remain optimistic. The folks who have good technologies, good science, good products are still going to raise money ultimately, as long as they manage their cash sensibly in the meantime.
So in general, you talk to a lot of the venture guys, and it sounds like so is the caution optimism from them, like they're still sitting on a lot of dry powder, but am I reading you right that sentiment is like if these signals that you talked about continue, then they're going to start deploying. But like you said, it still depends on like good data, good management teams, efficient use of capital. Like that's not going to change, right? That's now the bar that everybody's at.
Yeah, it's not going to change, but it has changed. And I think that's a good thing, right? I mean, we had some exuberance, during COVID and all these things, and it became perhaps a little too easy. That sort of rationalization and sensible management, we can't complain about that. That's for sure. But yeah, and again, I think it's not going to happen for the early guys. It's not going to happen quickly. This is not overnight. This is sort of trickle down from the bigger markets, if you like. And it's we've still got geopolitics and all these other things coming into play. So, it's not straightforward. But my personal view is, and I got to be cautious, because this time last year I was saying things are looking a little better as well, and it really wasn't a great year. Again, improved depending on who you are, right? For some people, it definitely improved second half of the year without a doubt. And I think that's we have real markers, real metrics that we can look at now. If we look at the public markets and all these things for bio, yeah, it's getting better. But we're still coming out of that that bottom. It's not as if we're suddenly shooting up either.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to take a while, but I think this year 26 will be better than 25, in my opinion.
Yeah. Let me ask you a couple other things, like just specific, because I'd be really curious. When you're talking to the venture folks, like personally, I heard AI in every conversation almost. Like, what are they saying? Like, what's like? Let's try to. I'd love to hear how you distill through the hype of that, and
It's
what is really happening that you're hearing and from an interest.
it's a problem, right? What the heck is AI, and where are we deploying it? And it's just become very complicated. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, almost every conversation there's some AI mention. I think there's a little bit of healthy cynicism, for if you're out talking to venture companies and you slap AI on your cover page and every page, they're getting used to seeing through the hype a little bit. I went to an interesting, one of the questions I think comes up. I think AI is clearly very real, huge potential impact, huge current impact. But a lot of the discussions are still around discovery, which is great. But I went to an interesting panel with Anna Berg-Asberg. She's the Chief Information Officer at Gilead Sciences, and a lady called Pia Hardy from NVIDIA. And one of the topics which really resonated with me is, okay, so now we're successfully applying AI, and we're developing, bringing out so many more candidates. And here, again, we're talking about therapeutics. There's a lot more than therapeutics out there. So now we have, instead of 100 candidates, we have 100,000 candidates. It doesn't really help us all that much if we can't manufacture them and deal with the logistics and the supply chain. So I had several conversations, including some observations during that panel, that we're perhaps not applying AI properly yet, or where we can get most benefit out of it near term. So here we're talking about, maybe it's quality release and, manufacturing processes and, logistics and all of these things. And we're still, I think, a little bit at the tip of the iceberg on that. But it's out there, it's real. One of the interesting things I thought, and this may bring up another topic in a little bit, is China and some of the internationalism. A couple of Chinese folks I talked to have said, AI, they almost just take it for granted now. We don't care if you've got AI or not, just give us the timelines and the products or whatever it is they're doing. So yeah, interesting topic. And I'm a bit of a troglodyte on this stuff as well. Some of our folks at Kymanox just run rings around me on it. So I started as a healthy cynic, and now I am a healthy, less cynical individual about it all. It's getting real, but I still don't think we're necessarily applying it all that well yet.
Well, that was some of the takeaway that I had, is that there's just more and more people looking at applying, big data, AI, machine learning across the value chain, right? So it's beyond discovery at this point.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, we at the QNOVA forum, they were talking about how it's impacting lab operations, and another group is how it's impacting regulatory and validation. There was and these all start to compound once they start taking effect. And so that's kind of what I heard. I heard it's the hype was that it's being adopted and applied much more broadly than discovery these days.
Yeah, and I think people are seeing it as a tool rather than as a savior, and I think that's healthy. How can we best use it? How can we use it to accelerate drugs or products, technologies to market?
Well, it's the China comment you made earlier, and I heard the same thing. We were with a few folks, a few companies out of China, and they said it's almost like this is expected. It's not, it's just how we use the tool. We've had this tool, now we're using it. But what's more important is, quality, how fast we're moving, how fast we're getting to decisions, and they're moving fast.
Oh, they are. And I think there were lots of quotes about, we here in the West need to be super vigilant. But again, I think things have changed a bit. I think the big pharma guys, for instance, they're sort of somewhat rejecting protectionism, if we can call it that, because they see benefits, they see products. I mean, I think I read just this morning, actually got to get the number right, 9 deals this year coming into the US out of China for innovative products already this year. And we're only at 20th of January. And I think things have changed. I think people's eyes are being opened. We had the Biosecure Act and concerns about IP and protection and all these things, and I think those are very real still. But it doesn't change the fact that China is turning out huge numbers of product candidates. Simple as that. I haven't seen them firsthand, but I've heard stories of some pretty amazing operations in terms of just sheer magnitude and bandwidth developing products.
And so what is that like? I don't want to mean to cut you off, but like unpack that. Like, what does that do for pharma BD teams, and what does that do for U.S. companies trying to compete? I mean, if you're a Chinese AI drug company and you've got 10x the number of candidates to kind of shop around, that that's a lot more time of diligence and discovery and figuring out, like, I mean, to me, that's a lot more in the market that it's competition, right?
I mean, good science is good science at the end of the day. I won't name names. I talked to the BD folks at one particular large pharma company, and they're spending, I don't know if it's most, but a good deal of their resource in China, looking for candidates, looking for partnerships, opportunities, and so on and so forth. Now, that's on the drug side and discovery. What about CMC manufacturing? Now, we see a bit of a trend the other way on that, onshoring into the US, and that's equally real. So it's a very interesting dynamic right now. I mean, if we're looking at manufacturing, that's where I play, as many of you may have realized by where I take topics in this discussion. The Chinese CDMOs, for instance, are in a very competitive space domestically now. They've got to the point where they're really starting to compete with each other quite aggressively for market share within China. So they're not looking quite as much outside of China to fill their tanks and their purification columns and what have you. So it's very interesting. We're in a global market space, and we need to wake up and realize that and leverage it to our best advantages on an individual level, company level, and country level here in the US. I don't know where your viewers are for this podcast, how many of them are outside the US and how many of them are inside. But yeah, as I say, it was notable to me that I think, this time last year at JP Morgan, probably there was, talk of, well, we've got to be careful and IP and, all this stuff, which was all very well publicized. This year, it's more, no, we've got to be in China to, access, obviously, big market itself, but it's more about accessing products and novel moieties. And that, to me, was a change. It's very real. I mean, I don't know if this statistic is real, but somebody told me there are now more, clinical trials going on in China than in the US. Doesn't surprise me. But if there was if you snooze, you lose type mentality to this that I picked up on. If you're not taking it seriously, you will, possibly lose. And we've got to be pragmatic about this. So.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's a global market, and I think everybody's trying to figure out how to adjust to a different playing field, right? I mean, it's kind of like suddenly you're out, you go to a baseball game and you're carrying a cricket bat, right? Like,
it's easier to hit the ball with a cricket bat.
Easier to hit the ball, yeah, maybe. But I mean, like, all those changes are, again, if the Chinese CDMOs are picking up domestic supply, then to me that opens up opportunity for U.S. CDMOs to pick up our domestic supply. So there's all these shifts happening. But again, at the same time, I mean, there is a lot more qualified, good science assets that pharma's picking up, which is not helping the early stage investment landscape here.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely right. And we should say, while China is, I don't know if we call it the elephant in the room or whatever, a big, not even going to call it a concern, a big issue to be addressed positively, negatively. We shouldn't forget Europe as well. One thing that really bothered me, actually, I had, perhaps less surprisingly from the Nordic countries, but I had specific discussions with both a French and a UK-based company, and they were very serious in saying this whole Greenland situation right now, they won't do business with the US if this continues. Oh. And they were dead serious. And I think we sit here in the States and we don't realize how, the impact of these things. So geopolitics definitely still plays a part out there.
Yeah, what'd you hear from the geopolitics side from VCs? Like, are they? And I'll drop a comment that I heard. I heard we expect that chaos is the new normal. So that's one comment I heard from a VC. But what you talked to a lot more than I did. What was the sentiment?
If I'm honest, I didn't go there too much on the geopolitics with the VC guys. It was definitely much more just about their bank accounts.
Yeah, but
So
that is
I'm not
a
sure. I didn't pick up any particular concerns from them. But again, all financial markets don't like chaos, right? But we
yeah.
have to deal with it. So that's where we are.
Yeah, we heard a couple things around because there was a lot of international folks coming and at the event, and that was kind of the sentiment, like, it's a global market. We all have to be competitive, almost to a degree. I don't want to say it like this, but almost like it's become like the normal, right? There's that things are going to shift, not just in the U.S. but other political climates as well, and companies have to be ready for that and be ready for just a very shifting global kind of landscape.
Yeah.
Not just out of the U.S.
Yeah, and regulations are tied to that as well, of course, as well. That's one area that I did feel some optimism. Again, very US centric here, but nobody seems to be losing too much sleep about changes and supposed chaos, if we're using the chaos word, at the FDA at the moment. Most people were saying, well, we're starting to see some shifts that are probably positive in terms of speed to market and what have you. So that was, I think, that was good to hear. As I say, people seem much more concerned about changes at the NIH than at the FDA, put it that way. But again, we have to be. Back to China, they're cranking out products from discovery into development in 6 months, and we just are slow. And some of that tardiness is because of regulation. It's not because we can't do it. So we'll see how these things pan out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hate to keep coming back to China, but at the end of the day, it is a global market, and I just kept hearing, not China in terms of like it was obsession of China, but it was more so on the backdrop of like there has to be a faster pace, more sensible policy, more sensible requirements. The National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, like they put their report together, and they've had a road show, and I keep coming back to this, and they said there's a shrinking window of about 2 years that the U.S. has before we lose true competitiveness, and it's speed and infrastructure that are two things going. And speed has to do with FDA, it has to do with investment, it has to do with AI, all these things that we've been talking about. But I always come back to that kind of statement from last year I heard. And again, China's kind of showing a playbook. It's either do we adopt some of their playbook or do we not,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you could argue for the patients of the world, it's healthy, right? I mean, it's good. We want more good products on the market to deal with whatever disease states or whatever it is out there. But we will, I think, on the infrastructure thing, we can compete. Maybe we can come back to that in a minute. On the other stuff, you said 2-year window. I'm not sure it's 2 years. I think it may be 1 year that we have to get our act together, because it's not just that we'll be uncompetitive. It's that perhaps the Europeans, and again, I see this, then get driven elsewhere. And they go to China and do their business there instead of in the US. And it's not just the Europeans, obviously, but use that as an example. So we in the US need to wake up. It is very real, and I'm not expert on this stuff by any means, but it's very clear that's the winds are changing a little bit, and we need to be competitive. Simple as that.
Did you feel any call to action, or did you feel any of that kind of that drive out of people looking to do deals, or
you mean a personal call to action, or
just when you're talking to people? I mean, do you feel like there's a desire to really kind of meet some of those kind of expectations?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we're waking up to it. Hopefully we wake up quick enough. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about exactly these things. These are more dinner table and barroom discussions. Morgan, and there's a lot of those out there. But people are concerned about it. So I don't think we're sleeping, but we've only just woken up.
Your expertise in CMC manufacturing, like how does that, what were some of the takeaways you heard from that? You were telling earlier that investors are starting to care about CMC, how this phase appropriate, earlier emphasis. What does that mean? What's the takeaway there?
Yeah, I think there's two main trends I'm seeing. So on that one you just mentioned, I think it's a great thing, and I think it's been driven probably by the cell therapy space, right, where we've got these ridiculous costs of goods or unsustainable for the long term. So people being investors in this case, some irrational exuberance and some great quality or great clinical data, and all looks great, and they're not thinking about, well, it's going to take us forever or cost us a huge amount of money to manufacture this thing, and then you get into the payers and all this other stuff. I think those lessons are being learned now, and I think importantly, I've seen evidence that it's trickling down, certainly within the broader biologic space, small molecules maybe, I don't know, less so probably, that people are actually taking CMC issues more seriously and earlier. So in smaller companies looking to raise funds, you need to cover your at least a slide in your deck on your CMC and how you're going to manufacture this thing and what your cost of goods is going to be. And I think that's very healthy. So I think that's a good thing. It's, for us at Kymanox, we see a lot of this type of work, and it's important. It's just as important as the clinical. They go hand in hand. So, and there's, my impression is, everybody focuses 90% on clinical and forgets about the CMC historically. But now I think that is changing. So I think that's very positive. And again, especially for some of these complex advanced moieties, that feeds in actually, personalized medicine was another trend I saw. It's not a new trend, but I think technologies have moved to the point, some advanced therapies, but not only advanced therapies, where that's becoming very real as well. And that's a trend I see as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a couple of examples, and, so have a think. It's a small company called Trios out of the UK I was talking to, give them a plug here. They've a novel approach to cancer immunotherapy, cancer vaccines, basically, which uses promiscuous peptides, which is simple and easy to make, and cheap, which is better than RNA, I guess. Got some interesting early clinical data. But what they're able to do with it is, as well as come up with products which should cover 70% of the patient population. I think they're in colorectal cancer to start off with. They can customize their product to the other less responsive. They can map. They know the epitopes. They can really customize these products. I think that's amazing for all of us. That somebody, and they can do it relatively cost effectively and quickly as well. These sort of trends are great for all of us as hopefully not, but potential future patients of these things. I quite often say soon I'll be taking them, not making them. But it's these trends are very real out there. Personalized dosing. Little company called Ondosis out of Sweden. Cool technology which allows you to titrate or allows your physician to titrate your doses on some neuro drugs and things like this. And it's all personalizing medicine. I think that's a trend. We've talked about it for a long time. I haven't seen recently thought of it as too real. We were moving towards it. We could see it coming. I think it's getting very real, and I think it's getting real because we're making it more cost effective as we go forward. So I think that's another interesting trend. Back to the CMC stuff, the onshoring here in the US of manufacturing. Absolutely real, very positive, I think, for the US economy and things. I worry, will we have enough people to do all of this stuff? But certainly, the big pharmas, and no surprise here, this is not JPM specific. Lots of announcements in the last half of last year on new facilities, expanded capacity, on and on. But we're also seeing companies from outside the US buying into the US market as well. Celltheon buying Lilly's facilities and on and on. And I think that can only be a positive economic driver for us here in the US. And again, frankly, it's good for us at Kymanox, so we're not complaining about it. Mm-hmm. But that it's very real. I think there's always some politics and hype behind some of the announcements. I think some things that were already planned were announced to take advantage of the political climate and situation, but it's real. And that, again, it may be, I hate to say this, but you start speculating, maybe the US starts to lose out on the discovery side and win on the delivery side. I think we've got to think this way. A lot of people won't like me for saying that probably, but it's possibly true. Economics is going to drive this stuff one way or the other. So
yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. I couldn't help but think, it is interesting. Now you have me thinking about that as like that trend, but the shift in manufacturing in the 80s, right? Where everything was shipped over to China and these little markets. I was reflecting on it, like with all of the early discovery kind of happening there. I mean, I was wondering if there was a similar trend happening now in that way. But now that you're talking, I'm like, maybe it's coming the other way. Maybe the production's now coming back this way. It's a interesting trend to watch and
Yeah,
see how it kind of plays
production
out.
is global. I mean, this is where I play, obviously, so I have a vested interest in this. But while it is definitely coming back in, huge investment in the US, drug product, drug substance, small molecule, large molecule, different technologies. It doesn't mean there's not investment elsewhere as well. I mean, as I say, China has created a domestic market, which I think is keeping them quite busy on the manufacturing side.
Wow.
But Europe, India, I've done a lot of work with Indian companies recently. It's not as if they're not expanding their, let's call it, biomanufacturing networks and small molecule networks as well. But relatively, the US has taken advantage of this. And again, we've got to remember we're a big marketplace for products as well. So, I don't want to get into politics and protectionism and things, but some of that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Roger, why don't, as we, we're at 30 minutes now, so I want to wrap up a little bit. How would you kind of tie a bow on this here? Like, what, when you think about this past week and the reflections you've had, how do you tie a bow on kind of the overall trends and sentiments that you're kind of coming back from?
We're going to be fine. I think that's the first one. And I sometimes I think we forget there's some amazing science and technology out there, here, elsewhere. And we're doing this for the health of populations by and large around the world. And again, another thing to say, not just human populations, but a few interesting animal discussions this week as well. So we shouldn't forget those four-legged creatures and those with beaks. But no, we're going to be fine. We'll weather our way through. The geopolitics is probably the biggest messy aspect, I think, at the moment, which we're all dealing with everywhere in the world. And I think that's my biggest concern of it. But other than that, I mean, the capital is out there. It will flow. It has to flow. I mean, that's what it's for. It's not going away. It's just being held. So I think there is genuine optimism on that. I think we have to work together. Global street smarts is a term I've heard. Let's get real. And I see the industry doing it as well. And big pharma, that they're shrugging a little bit at the politics and saying, well, that's great, but we still got to find products, we still got to find people, we still got to find patients. We've got to work together. So that gives me actually cause for optimism. A lot of very optimistic discussions. It certainly was not a doom and gloom week by any means. I think it was, there was a great deal of optimism. But importantly, there's some pragmatism and realism as well. We're not out of the woods here. So I think we sail on. And I think some consolidation within the broad life science space, it's probably a good thing. It's some of it's happened. There's been some shaking down, certainly in the areas I cover and watch, and it's not negative. I think people, and AI comes into this as well, of course. We still lack people here in the US, but I hear the same elsewhere as well. India's growing its expertise, for instance, in biomanufacturing. They don't have people. They have lots of people, but they don't have the trained and experienced people. So that one that's a topic that certainly the events I attended didn't get touched on too much this year. I probably heard more of that previous years. Serious issue. I mean, we need smart, intelligent people, and AI doesn't solve that problem. It takes away some of the grunt work perhaps that we all have to do. But that's another topic that I think we can't forget about. So I mean, takeaway is optimistic without a doubt. And we'll see where we go. But I'm smiling.
That's good. As long as you're smiling, because like I said, you're. I know. I can look
I'm
at you.
I'm a cynic normally, Chris. You know that. So.
Yeah, I know. I look to you, and I'm going to get the truth. So, well, that's good. That's a good wrap up. We're going to be fine. I think there's a saying that I'll say all the time. Good news or bad news. I think you just got to say, let's see.
We're adaptable. As an industry, we're getting real, right? Yeah. We are pragmatic. We are adaptable. I do strongly think that none of us can do it alone. I think we're going to have to really work hard to keep those in the current situation, keep international collaborations and all of this stuff going. Again, ignore China at your peril. for better or worse. It's there, it's real, it's going to impact, what they're doing in China is going to impact what you're doing in your day-to-day life over the next 5-10 years. But it doesn't have to be all bad. I mean, it's not all bad. I mean,
No,
it's a lot of opportunity out there. So
yeah, well, I like it. I like it, Roger. We're going to be fine. We got to do it together, not alone. So work on your partnerships and remain lean and run a good business, right?
Yeah, don't forget your CMC, please.
And don't forget your CMC and call Roger and the team at Kymanox when you need it. And our
nice plug, Chris. I like that. So.
Friends at Qnova who sponsor this for your medical and clinical work.
And thanks to you and you guys for putting all this stuff together last week. I mean, there's some really nice events as well. So kudos to you.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Again, I got to give the shout out to Qnova. They brought us out there, and one day I interviewed people for 5 hours straight. It was really cool. I met some amazing people out there. I mean, again, I met so many amazing people, and that's what gives me hope and optimism. Like, there are some people tackling incredible things at the early stage, and they're really brilliant people. We got people coming out of semiconductor industry entering biopharma. We got people coming out of like the battery, another guy came out of it was an engineer for like 3M. He's now tackling medical devices and biopharma. So there's all kinds of just amazing opportunities.
That's important that we don't forget. I mean, there's amazing science out there. You look at some of the cellular therapies out there. We're talking curative, not therapy, curative. That's unbelievable. We've got a lot of work to do still, but it's coming. And we shouldn't forget that, and that's ultimately the main reason for being there and being at JPM and everything else. I was at an event in Stockholm at the Karolinska Institute a little while ago, back in December, and I hadn't realized how far proteomic atlas and all this stuff has come, and having that knowledge that then allows us to address, critical pathways and diseases. We didn't have that even 2 years ago, 3 years ago. All this stuff is going on in the background, and it's only going to be healthy for both the industry, but more importantly for patients. And that's what we've got to keep focused on. So.
Amen to that. Well, Roger, thank you very much. I always appreciate chatting with you. Always learn something.
And I hope the Orioles wake up next year.
Well, that's another podcast all in itself.
All right, we'll take that one offline.
But I'm sure we'll run it. I'm sure we'll be at another game next year when you come to town. So
I'm sure we will. I look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all for joining in. Really interesting discussion, enjoyable discussion. I hope you come in and tune back next week. We are going to bring on Harsha Rajashami. He's the founder of Jiva Clinical Trials and US Indo Rare. So he runs a virtual clinical trials company, applying AI to the clinical process. He's been doing that for several years. He's a good friend of mine I've known for a long time. He also runs a nonprofit, speaking in India and global industry, really focused on rare disease. So we're going to talk to him ahead of Rare Disease Month, but is a global nonprofit, helps to identify innovation in the US and in India and move forward discovery and clinical trial programs. So I'm excited to talk to him and see what's happening. Now we got our CMC guy. Next week we're going to talk to our clinical guy. So please tune back in then. Again, thanks to Qnova and Roger. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.